Thank you, Madam President. I was asked to give you a little bit of an overview of how we built the bond package that is before you, and then be available to answer any questions about what's inside the bond package. Several years ago, the district initiated a process to create a more transparent and more objective priority setting process for identifying capital project requirements and capital project needs. The current board accelerated the development of that process, and the work that you're seeing today takes advantage of, if you will, about 50% of the completion of that process. And subsequently, we'll be completing that process over the next couple of years, and incoming bond proposals and capital improvement plan projects, or the plan development, you'll see us relying on these more objective and more transparent measurement systems. So that the basic guts of the process that we're instituting suggests that there are three basic types of data that we need to take into account when we consider whether a capital project or a facility improvement is required. And that's highlighted on the first page of the the front side of the handout I just gave you. The first of those inputs is capacity. Do we need more space for the students that we expect to educate in the future? That's a very, that is the most easily quantifiable of the concerns that we need to address. And that's a concern, or that's a type of input that we've been dealing with since the district was formed decades ago. That led to the construction of several new schools over the last 15 years, and it also leads to the conclusion at this point that we're not recommending any additional school construction, new school construction, for the foreseeable future. Second is facility condition. What is the condition of the existing school facilities? We've been using a variety of metrics to help us determine that in the past, primarily based on the, if you will, the human intelligence of our maintenance staff, of the building users, of our capital projects teams. We've initiated a process. We're approximately 50% of the way through the process of getting an external review conducted by a third party of all of our facilities, and using that review to actually create a metric or an index against which we can compare different schools' facility conditions. We've got 39 schools have been done to date. They're essentially the 39 oldest buildings, the 39 schools that we presume will be the neediest in this. Every school is examined on the basis of, they have approximately 40 different components or systems that could wear out or that could require replacement or modification. We examine each of those 40 systems. We are able then to anticipate when each of those systems will require attention, and through that we can assess the relative prioritization of need in those 39 buildings, and soon to be all 93 of our district-owned facilities. That's 87 school buildings and 6 support facilities. So that process is underway. For 39 buildings, we have those indexes, and that was used as a primary driver of the bond package you see before you. The third type of input we need, and we're not as far advanced in the development of this input as we are for facility condition or capacity, is educational adequacy. In other words, how well do the buildings meet our needs of providing an educational function? It's one thing to have buildings that are capable of housing enough students and are in good condition, have good roofs and good boilers and so forth. But if they're not the right type of facilities to provide the education that the community expects, then they're not. Then we have to consider that need as we look at facility improvements. We're in the process of conducting educational adequacy assessments right now. We expect that the CIP that will be presented to the Assembly in March will take advantage of educational assessments over basically the same 39 buildings that we'll have the facility condition information on. And then in the coming years, we'll complete both the facility condition and educational adequacy assessment work for all of our buildings, so that going forward, we will have a living document that can be updated and improved, that can take advantage of new information about the status of our facilities and about educational requirements of our facilities. And based on that, we can bring you and bring the community requests for funding for facility improvements. And that's been our goal. And as I said, the current board has accelerated our use of these tools and the funding for the completion of these assessments. So if you turn the page, so now we'll have three types of data. The data, there'll still be some level of judgment that has to be applied. The three types of information will not mesh seamlessly. You will not get a single magic number from those three different types of data. We're not aware of anybody at other districts that have been able to create that sort of a single index. But we will have information that tells us what facilities need work to stay in useful condition, which buildings might need to be expanded, although, as I said earlier, we don't think that will be an important driver in the near future. And then which buildings need improvements so that they can provide the appropriate amount of educational service. So based on those three inputs, we should then be able to put all of our buildings into one of the four categories that you see sort of in the middle of this page. The first being, no action is required. All of the facility condition, the capacity of the building, and the educational functionality of the facility is in a satisfactory or better condition. And we would expect all of our newer buildings, buildings constructed in the last 10 to 15 years, maybe as much as 20 years, to fall into this category. The second one is where we would expect the majority of our buildings to fall. Buildings that have some requirements that need to be addressed in order to deal with issues relating to their condition or their educational functionality. Examples of this would be buildings that need new roofs, boilers, buildings that don't have elementary schools without a gymnasium, other types of improvements that will directly enhance educational functionality or the life expectancy of the facility. And then there's a third category. The third category on here is a major project, a replacement or a renewal. Recent examples of that would be something like Clark, Sand Lake, or Chester Valley, the three latest major projects. These projects would be considered or recommended when the volume of educational functionality needs or facility condition needs were such that it didn't make sense to do individual system improvements in the building. It would be more cost effective to engage in a larger project and essentially attack the entire facility rather than pieces and parts. So those are the three basic options. The last one is one that we haven't used extensively in the past, although it's certainly an option that needs to be considered: managed obsolescence. If we identify a facility that we no longer need for the long term, there's no reason why we have to continue to operate it. An example of that is the original Northern Lights ABC building in Spinard. That was a building that was replaced. Debbie remembers the process that went into this. There's a new Northern Lights ABC, Harriet remembers as well, over on Dowling and Lake Otis. And at the time, the plan was not to continue to operate the old Northern Lights ABC for very much longer. It was used as a replacement school for a couple of capital projects, and then the goal was ultimately to close it and to surplus it. As it turns out, we've identified a charter school user for that facility, and we have undertaken a number of projects to improve that condition: sprinkler systems, fire alarms, roofing, bathrooms, etc. So we never actually got to the point where we did surplus it, but we started down that road, and if the charter school need had not emerged, that might well have been the outcome for that program. The John F. Kennedy building on Fort Rich is another example of a school building that's no longer needed for a school. It's going to be dedicated to an alternate use. But that's one that, were it not for that alternate use, we essentially would have stopped doing facility condition improvements, educational improvements on that structure, and it would have been dedicated, or it would have been essentially given back. So those are the 4 basic options. Now there's hybrids of some of these that are available to us on case-by-case basis, but these are the 4 basic types of answers that we have for each of our buildings based on the data gathered through the process on the front of the page. So getting to more specifically, how did we take this information and turn it into a bond package? We started with a community review. The district, as many of you are aware, the board members are acutely aware that we have had for the last several years a capital request advisory committee. It operated for 5 or 6 years, served a great function, but for a variety of reasons, there was a decision made to reconstitute it, to change its mission slightly, to change the way in which it was constituted, and ultimately to create a new entity. That group, similar name, Capital Improvement Advisory Committee, is about half to a third of the size. And instead of appointing folks to that group with a specific expectation that they represent a stakeholder group or a specific school attendance area, which had been how members were selected to the CRAC. The CIAC is constituted of folks, many of which served on the old CRAC, but we explicitly requested and directed that they not represent individual stakeholder or constituency groups, that instead they look at the broader community interest and the broader district interests. That doesn't mean that we don't have a strong geographic diversity. We have a lot of professional diversity. We have a lot of political diversity on this group. And in the packet, you'll see the roster of that group. It still represents, I believe, a useful cross-section of the community to help us make decisions on capital investments and capital improvements. So that group started their evaluation. They asked us to bring them a starting place for a list. We gave them a list of $90 million worth of projects. In the meantime, the board had provided the administration and the CIAC some initial guidance as to the framework for the committee's work. And that framework was taken into account as well. So using that framework of the board's guidance and using this sort of large list of projects as a starting place, the committee worked through. They met 3 or 4 times over the course of about 3 or 4 weeks, 3 weeks, I guess, 3 weeks, Rachel, right? And then they developed a recommendation for the administration to consider. The administration considered that, made a couple of minor adjustments to that recommendation, and then brought that to the board in October for the board's evaluation. The board took final action on that recommendation in November, and that's what you see before you as a recommendation for assembly approval. And that was introduced just before Thanksgiving, and I believe is set for public hearing. Well, I'm pretty sure it's set for public hearing on Tuesday night. In a normal course of business, we might well have asked for a dedicated work session on that subject, but since we knew this meeting was scheduled in the same time frame as when a work session might have otherwise been scheduled, we presumed that this could serve that purpose and give us a chance to answer any questions that the assembly might have. Thank you.
Thank you for the overview. Ms. Duncan, is this the go around the
Two things. One, did I hear you, did you have a consultant for this research? So it's sort of going for that and all that type of practice.
We have consultants, two separate consultants. One is helping us on facility condition, and one is helping us on educational adequacy. For educational adequacy, what they're doing is they're evaluating our structures against our educational specifications. The specifications that the district has developed over time to identify what we believe is appropriate for facilities for educational purposes. So they're taking existing condition and measuring that against our standards and identifying the variances.
So it's a somewhat tailored best practice, tailored for your site.
Yes, and the ed specs, although they're developed with local needs in mind, so when we build a site, we build in room for things like snow storage and things like that, and there's a big enough room for the snow blower at our school sites. They are based on national standards, and we've used national tools, nationally developed tools to help us develop those ed specs.
And you build for 50-year life.
At least.
And then
Now, not all systems in the building have a 50-year expected life, but the bones, if you will, are constructed for at least 50 years. But not, we don't build roofs that necessarily will last for 50 years, or not all the mechanical systems, et cetera, are rated for that type of useful life.
And my last question, when I was in the package we received, showed the breakdown where we had 46 million, and we left more than an additional 15 million. No,
13.14.
45 and 13. You're in the ballpark.
Anyways, so the process that you just explained to us got you the 46,
45.
45, and 45. Actually, it's 45.
Correct.
And the career technical for West was an additional, it was 13, and it was not, so it was above the line.
It was above the line that the CIAC and the administration used as to build the proposal for the board. If the West Romic CTE project was on the list of the $90 million list that I described originally, it's a great project.
Right.
It wasn't a lack of support for that project. It was whether or not we could include it inside the $45 million sort of target that we were shooting for.
And this whole concept is the organic concept is going on
The CTE project?
The CTE versus the West Romic.
It is definitely an important part of the district's overall CTE program, and it's a very worthy project. It's just a question of how they come along.
Two questions. First, I applaud the due process, and I think it's great, so kudos on that. I did, though, look at the list on the facility condition assessment, particularly then for Eliana and Rabbit Creek because of those numbers. I saw Eliana mentioned, but then I saw several mentioned that seemed significantly further down the assessment list, like, Bayshore, what was the other ones?
There are some projects.
Why did you include Rabbit Creek?
Let me first address the second half of your question. Simply because a building has a relatively low index score, that's made up of a number of components that have issues. If the component is a critical one, even though it may not create, it may not drive a big index number, it may still require immediate attention. A good example is a fire alarm system. Fire alarm system is not a particularly expensive component, and as a result, since the index is driven by dollars, the more expensive the components that need replacement, the higher the index. So schools that have expensive components that need replacement, it is, when we were talking about this with the board and with the committee, we segregated these into what we called emergent conditions, which were things that needed to be done to keep the school in operation in the very near term. Fire alarms, boilers, things like that. Even if those were in schools that didn't otherwise have high indexes, we still prioritized those projects, and the committee and the board agreed with that. Exactly. It can't be used in a vacuum.
Second question.
Mm-hmm.
The only rationale I've seen so far in the material I've read, I haven't read it completely, for the additional CTE at West, the comment was, well, now they're getting no CTE at West. Is that true?
No.
Thank you.
No, it's, Ms. Osiander, it's not true. They are getting programs offered that are within the classroom structure that exists there now. And some of these that have been a very high priority are with needing more sophisticated equipment, they need larger spaces, and so this whole idea that we've been advancing this career technical education program, and we can get you more information about what is going to go into that
My
facility.
sense is you're going to need the rationale for that part.
Okay, we can do that before Tuesday night. We can certainly be
That's all right.
prepared to respond. No, that's good, because, but we have the school district has had a multi-year phased-in plan on CNTE, and last year the bonds that passed had the first phase, this next group they're coming on. So we'll get you some information.
And we wanted to clarify something on the facility condition index, that what the CIAC decided to recommend is on the things that are 0.3 and above, that there are priority projects within each of those that take those indexes down, which is different. You could choose to just do Mount Iliamna, right? So that's all we're going to do because that's the most critical. And instead, the recommendation was, no, look at the components that are most critical, and let's start moving each of those facilities down to what the industry standard is, which is 0.3. So that's the direction that we're going at this point. Is over time, our goal is to have everything in a 0.3 or below, and then be able to maintain that so we don't get into this situation of critical. Mr. Hall.
Yes, basically, Ms. Johnson and Ms. Lucianders touched on my part of the question. I was anxious to hear a bit of the rationale on the part of the board. You've got an incredible process in place. You come up with a recommendation of 45.9, but then the board did a 30% increase on top of what the committee and the administration had recommended. And God knows I love CTE. I've cheered it for so long. It's unbelievable. I probably understand that as much as anyone. But probably part of what will, I'll throw some caution to you is the recommendation that we stay in bonding under what we paid. And this, of course, puts you above what you paid off last year. I think, bonds are probably going to be a tough sell to the community again this year. As you're aware, the resolution that you got, we ended up with bonding. The resolution we actually sent to our own administration was no bonding at all, and we were ending up with about a $32 million bond package there. But just kind of like a little insight into the conversation that occurred amongst the school board for the justification of a 30% increase over what was recommended.
Mr. Drummond, would you like us to get an answer for you, or should? No, but Ms. Drummond was next. So do you mind if I skip to an answer and then come back? Mr. Smith? Okay, Mr. Smith, do you want to?
Being the big spender on the school board, I'm the guy that pushed the amendment for West, and I really think West was being neglected in the whole concept of career technical. I mean, we probably would be doing this next year if it hadn't passed, but that community really feels like they need about a $300 million new high school, but I don't think that's going to happen in the near future. But I really think that CTE is a very strongly supported concept in this community. West really, with the exception of those classroom-type CTE programs, doesn't have anything. And I attended Anchorage High School when they had wood shop, metal shop, and auto mechanics. And I really strongly feel that, being fiscally conservative, I still think if I could have willed everything in this bond issue, I would have had a couple of bond issues for schools, but it's clear to me that that wasn't going to happen. But I really think that West Wilmington deserves an opportunity to have a facility just like all the other high school and junior high, middle school complexes. And I think the public is going to have the final say if we really want to kill all the projects. I think we've got a good package, and I hope you won't take that out. I think it ought to be allowed to go to the voters.
Keep going down the list, and then I'll.
Well, part of that conversation.
Okay.
Okay, and Ms. Drummond as well. So I'm just going to keep going down the list. Ms. Drummond.
Thank you. On the West thing, as a graduated West parent and paying really close attention to West High School since the late 80s, I have seen those shop classrooms. They were being phased out when I started to realize that there are needs in this district beyond the elementary school, which my kid happened to be attending at the time, which had 11 portable classrooms. And West has been incredibly patient, and they've also been very supportive. The whole West Anchorage community has been really supportive of everybody else's school bonds at the ballot box, as one of our constituents noted in a very thoughtful email the other day. And I think the longer we wait, yeah, the more expensive that replacement project is going to get. Number one, because construction costs are not going down. They are only rising. And until kids stop going to school and people stop driving on roads, then we can stop doing maintenance work. I mean, I think that's a pretty ridiculous attitude when we've got a thriving community that continues to grow, and until kids stop trooping through our schools at the rate they're doing it, we're going to have to maintain those buildings so we can educate those kids and deal with our investment. I think West has felt incredibly left out of that whole process of fiscal renewal, that we all know how many tens of millions of dollars we spend on each of those other high schools, and West is still sitting with the same, basic good bones and all of that stuff, as they found out when they did a minor renewal a few years ago, with a couple of additions, but the core of the building needs a ton of work, and they're not going anywhere. They can keep going to that school. And Associated and I were boundary changes, which were probably the most painful thing we did in our 9 or 10 years on the school board, and that's not something we want to have to do. And I do have another couple of questions, but I'll let the West piece continue.
And let's get all comments on what's done and then go back
Thank
to the list set up in this room. Ms. Kennedy, Mr. Friedman.
Well, I just wanted to point out something that I don't want us to lose sight of, and that is, yes, it looks like more than what was paid off last year, but we need to keep in mind that we have had one small bond passed in the last 3 years, and in that amount of time, we've actually paid off about $250 million worth of bonds. So, we have to make sure that we keep that overall perspective. It's not just compared to last year. It really is kind of our bonding history, so to speak, and that's actually very impressive in terms of what's been paid off recently.
Mr. Friedman.
Yeah, more specifically, over the last 5 years, even if this bond passes, we'll still be over $100 million less than where we would have been. But that said, I don't think it's realistic to assume that, just like with roads, you're not going to repave a road after 20 years for the same cost you paved it 20 years earlier. Prices go up, and to assume that either the school district or the city will always be submitting to the voters a lower dollar amount of bonds than was paid off in the year before, if we follow that path, we will have potholes and we will have falling down schools. You just can't do it. I was convinced that this was a worthy addition, partly because what we had given to the committee was an artificial number.